Hello. Today I'll be discussing health outcomes related to diabetes in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the many lands across this continent colonised as Australia. I recognise and appreciate their deep connection to land, waters and greater community. I pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. Before we can begin to understand this topic and the related health outcomes, we must first define the condition. Diabetes is a chronic metabolic disorder where there is too much glucose in the blood. This occurs when the body is unable to produce enough insulin or use insulin correctly to break down and control the glucose levels. There are different types of diabetes. Today I'll primarily be discussing type 2, which is often characterized as a lifestyle disease. This complex condition can impact the whole body as seen in the figure on the right. Common complications that occur with diabetes include heart attack, kidney disease, stroke, impotence, amputations and blindness. These are often seen with delayed or inadequate treatment. As seen in Wong et al.'s 2005 studies, Indigenous Australians experience poorer mortality outcomes and significantly higher chance of comorbidities. For instance, amputation rates are up to 37 times higher than non-Indigenous Australians. The first recorded diagnosis of diabetes in an Indigenous person was in 1923. In 2018, diabetes was identified as the second leading cause of death for Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people. Not only are complications more likely in Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people, but the prevalence of type 2 diabetes is currently up to 4 times that of non-Indigenous Australians, making them one of the most affected populations in the world. Social determinants underlying the prevalence and complication of Indigenous Australians with diabetes are strongly linked to their forced adaptation to colonisation. When white settlers invaded Australia, they forced the First Nations from their lands, practices and culture. People who have learned practices with food sources available to their local environment were forced to move to other parts of the country where those resources were no longer available. This removal from culture and family left the young without having learned traditional customs of food sharing, hunting or its medicinal purposes. Instead, many were sent to work for white Australian families, where less nutritional foods, like white sugar and flour, became highly available. The systematic discrimination that continues today is responsible for the gap between non-Indigenous Australians and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, the gap being an umbrella term for systemic issues contributing to low socioeconomic status and poor health. Marmot's social gradient of health theory states that the lowest socioeconomic group will have lower mortality rates and wellness than each class above. Being forced into significantly lower class in society has had substantial impact on Indigenous people's health, including the high rates of diabetes and comorbidities. Indigenous history since colonisation has seen the population experience marginalisation, ongoing generational trauma, disadvantage and stress. The cumulative effects of ongoing stress responses are known as allostatic load. This impacts multiple body systems, including endocrine, immune, cognitive, and cardiovascular. A higher allostatic load can result in dysregulation of blood sugar levels. Seen in the study by Daniel et al., the function of glucose metabolism was far worse in Indigenous Australians than any other group tested. As you can see, not only the removal of lands and foods has impacted diabetes levels, but also continued stresses directly led to the condition. In order to improve these levels, certain barriers must be addressed. Communication has been an obstacle in previous attempts to intervene in the increasing numbers of diabetes in the community. It is necessary to effectively consult with the community in order directly to determine what solutions would be beneficial for them as opposed to adopting methods used for other cultures and locations. Cultural respect and understanding of the current and traditional culture of the group is necessary to provide solutions and work together to make progress. Using a lens of traditional knowledge of health allows for participation and empowerment, leading to the condition being managed by the community and within the community. Physical access to services, specifically within remote regions, is a major ongoing challenge that must be addressed in order to see improvement. Access to medical services for procedures, ongoing treatment, checkups is lacking in rural areas and smaller communities. Cost of treatments can also be a barrier, particularly when specialists are required. Environmental factors such as access to fresh and healthy foods, stable work, safe environments to exercise must also be considered. Social environment and systematic disadvantage are massive barriers which must be addressed for positive changes to be seen. Introducing Indigenous-run clinics with Aboriginal healthcare workers is a vital intervention which will aid cultural understanding and return of culture to the community. Further implementations of these clinics will assist in removing cultural barriers I discussed in the previous slide. Having Indigenous-run programs and workers provides the opportunity to restore connection to culture and community and allows for reintegration of traditional food customs and health knowledge. A pilot study was run on the Flinders model of self-care management in a clinic run by Aboriginal healthcare workers. This model showed improvement in self-management of diabetes by the Indigenous patients, and self-identified difficulties had reportedly improved by 12%. Other similar clinics exist throughout Australia, some offering programs such as grief and trauma counselling, stolen generational counselling, traditional healing centres, and Health for Life programs, in order to further address the ongoing stresses that act as social determinants of Indigenous people's health. Unfortunately, these models do not address other social determinants such as access to preventative health services or improvement in social environments, and therefore only can lead to so much change. For improvement in Indigenous diabetes health to be seen, we must work together as a country to close the gap. Thank you.